this was a conflict that really defined the 21st century. Think about it. On one side, you had the world's only superpower, and on the other, a single man hiding out in the mountains. This is the story of a day that changed literally everything, and the two-decade war that came right after.
It all started on what felt like just another Tuesday morning. 19 men boarded 4 different commercial airplanes, but they had a plan that was absolutely devastating.
And just within a few hours, the immediate human cost of what they did was terrifyingly clear. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives that day.
But you see, that one day, it was only the beginning. The American response would go on to reshape global politics, kicking off a whole new kind of war, one with no clear borders, and really no end in sight.
And this was a war fought not just with soldiers, but with an absolutely mind-boggling amount of money. The final bill? It would eventually hit an almost incomprehensible $8 trillion. And if you think that's shocking, the final human toll, it just dwarfs the tragedy of that first day. By the time it was all over, an estimated 4.6 million people were dead. So how did we get here? How does one tragic morning spiral into a 20-year global war? Okay, so to really get our heads around this two-decade war, we've got to go back to that day and the sheer precision and shock of the attacks themselves. So check this out. In just 77 minutes, 4 hijacked planes were turned into guided missiles. The attackers, armed with nothing more than box cutters and knives, took control. 2 of the planes were aimed straight for the Twin Towers, the symbols of American economic power. A third slammed into the Pentagon, the heart of its military. And the fourth? Well, it was headed for Washington before the passengers fought back, forcing it to crash in a field. And right in the middle of all this chaos, something really strange happened. One of the hijackers, a man named Mohammed Atta, accidentally broadcast his message to air traffic control instead of the passengers. That calm, chilling voice created massive confusion. Controllers thought it was just a regular hijacking and actually cleared a runway, waiting for a plane that was never going to land. You know, when that first plane hit, everyone on the news was calling it a tragic accident. But then came the second plane, as the cameras were rolling live. And that was the moment for millions of people watching around the world that the horrifying truth just sank in. This was no accident. So, with the whole country just reeling in shock, the question changed instantly from what just happened to who did this and what are we going to do about it? And the economic hit? It was immediate and absolutely catastrophic. The New York Stock Exchange was shut down. When it finally reopened, the markets just tanked. The attacks caused an estimated $1.4 trillion in initial economic damage, and U.S. GDP growth, which had been cruising at over 4%, basically dropped to zero. All right, so the U.S. pretty much immediately pointed the finger at al-Qaeda, a militant Islamist group, and its leader, Osama bin Laden. But here's where it gets a bit complicated. Bin Laden himself actually gave an interview denying any involvement. And at the same time, major Muslim organizations, scholars, and even leaders of countries that weren't exactly friendly with the U.S. all came out and strongly condemned the attacks, saying they went against the teachings of Islam. So, despite those initial denials, this accusation set the stage for a direct showdown. The U.S. turned all of its attention to Afghanistan, which is where bin Laden was being protected by the government there, the Taliban. What happens next is this incredibly fast breakdown in diplomacy. The U.S. gave a simple ultimatum. Hand over bin Laden. The Taliban came back with a counteroffer. Show us proof, and we'll try him ourselves in an Islamic court. They even suggested turning him over to a neutral country. But for a nation demanding swift justice, these offers just looked like stalling. The U.S. rejected all of them. And when the demands weren't met, the invasion began. And just like that, President Bush declares a new global war on terror. The first battleground was Afghanistan. And just as U.S. military planners predicted, the Taliban government fell apart pretty quickly. In just 3 months, they were out of power, and the U.S. installed a new friendly leader, Hamid Karzai. But here's the thing. A war that looked like it was over in just a few months, well, it would drag on for 2 decades. And the reason? The main target, Osama bin Laden, was still out there somewhere. The hunt for bin Laden himself was it was long and difficult. And a really big turning point came in 2003 when the U.S. shifted its focus and a ton of resources to invade Iraq instead. This move gave the Taliban exactly the breathing room they needed to regroup. Then, in 2004, a video came out. In it, for the very first time, bin Laden explicitly said he was responsible for 9/11. But even with that confession, it still took another 7 years to finally find him. Finally, after a full decade, the manhunt came to an end on May 2nd, 2011. A team of U.S. Navy SEALs carried out a secret raid on a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The operation took about 40 minutes, and Osama bin Laden was killed. And to make sure his grave didn't become some kind of shrine, his body was buried at sea. Okay, so the main guy is gone, right? You'd think the war would be over, but no. The American mission in Afghanistan kept going for another 10 years. So why stay? And what was the real final cost of this whole 20-year saga? And the answer to why they stayed, well, it shows just how much the world and the mission itself had changed. The reasons were now about geopolitics and economics. China was rising as a new global power, and a U.S. military base in Afghanistan was seen as a way to keep them in check. On top of that, surveys had found that Afghanistan was sitting on a massive treasure trove of valuable minerals, including lithium, which, is essential for all the batteries we use today. So let's circle all the way back to the number that kicked this whole thing off, the attack on September 11th, a horrific tragedy that cost nearly 3,000 people their lives. Now, get ready for this. The response, this whole war on terror, is estimated to have resulted in the deaths of 4.6 million people across several countries. That is more than 1,500 times the number of people who died in the initial attack. It's just an unimaginable scale. And if you look at the money, it tells the exact same story. The initial economic damage from the attacks was about $1.4 trillion. The cost of the wars that followed for the U.S. taxpayer was $8 trillion. And who benefited financially from all the spending? Mostly, it was defense contractors and weapons companies, whose profits soared the longer the conflict went on. So, when it was all said and done, after 20 years, after trillions of dollars and millions of lives, the U.S. left Afghanistan, and the Taliban took right back over. And it leaves us with this really profound and unsettling question to think about. Who actually won this war?